This is Rosa Garza Moreno. Are we recording? This is Rosa Garza Moreno, member of Messy Conversations planning team. Before jumping into the session, on behalf of my team, I just want to give you some brief reminders and announcements. As usual, we will spend the first half hour listening to the conversation among our guests, and we'll open the last half hour for audience comments and questions, closing at 5 p.m. But will remain a bit longer for those of you to choose to engage in a little bit longer. So I hope this is our usual format for those of you that haven't been here before. We are hoping also to add more volunteer members to our team, our planning team. More members will really help us bring in more perspectives to the Antioch community, give Messy Conversations more visibility, and share stamina to keep the program running. So it would be really appreciated if you are interested in joining the Messy Conversations planning team. Please give us a note in the chat, and we will really appreciate that one. Welcome to those that just joined the conversation or the session. The next week, it's another part of the announcement. Next week, November 24th, we have our last Messy Conversation of the season with the topic Politics, Race, and Cartoons with David G. Brown from Black Creatives Association. It's going to be very interesting. It's in conversation with and facilitated by Clarence R. Williams, one of our team members. And not to be missed, our winter season calendar will be shared with you soon so that you know what we are concocting for the next season. And finally, just to get us started with today's program. Today, November 17, marks the 33rd anniversary of the passing of Audre Lorde, a Black woman, poet, author, philosopher, feminist. And by the way, we have a question for you. Do we have a question for people? Isa? There's a question for you. Have you ever learned something from Audre Lorde yourselves? Do we have the results, Isa? So the majority of people having learning something from Audre Lorde, others not yet, then you are in for a treat. For everybody, if you are into Audre Lorde or not, you are in for a treat today. To keep on learning on that, it is my honor to welcome two dear professional Black women writers, instructors, and mothers, Antioch MFA Creative Writing Program alumna LaCoya Katoe Gessesse and Ryane Granados. Their detailed bios, amazing accomplishments are in the website link that Holly provided earlier, and we can keep providing it. You have way more information about them than the one that I can possibly provide. And like someone very special in this space used to say, now that you found your parking lot, I will let myself out of the way and leave you with them. LaCoya and Ryane.
Well, thank you, Rosa, and thank you, Messy team, for inviting me back. And thank you to Ryane, who is not only a colleague, but a dear, dear friend. When Rosa approached me about this conversation, she immediately came to mind because we talk about so many of the things organically or naturally, so many of the themes that are in Audre Lorde's work all the time in our lives. And so this felt very natural to have you here with me, Ryane. So thank you. And thank you for that poll, Messy team, because we were going to start by just saying that, you know, Audre Lorde's work and her quotes are often everywhere, just like in places you wouldn't expect. on stationery and little cutesy cards in movies and music and rap songs. And the funny story is that at the age of 17, I think it was, I saw a movie, a rom-com movie with an all-black cast called The Best Man. And in that movie, an unlikely character recites this quote. And the quote was a very popular Lorde quote. If I didn't define myself for myself, I would be crunched, into other people's fantasies for me and eaten alive. And in that moment, in this sort of like rom-commy light movie moment, I popped up. And, you know, in my version of spirituality, I knew immediately that that was a portal to something for me. And I couldn't Google her, you know, right then. I don't even know if I had a phone at that particular point. But when she came up in my studies, it made such sense to me. And so I'm happy to be here to talk about her. Ryan, how did you learn about Audre Lorde?
Yes, I definitely didn't have a phone when I learned about Audre. I was a child, but to that point, I wanted to also open with just thanking everyone for having me and for indulging LaCoya and I in what really does feel like an extension of our weekly conversations as writers and moms and educators, our lengthy text messages. And in the case of my work as an educator, I have some students that have logged on as well, and they will attest to the fact that I am very much an awkward Black girl. I was that girl who grew up kind of nerdy, kind of bookish, very hyperverbal. I used to turn Mad Libs, if you're old enough to remember what Mad Libs are, into my own little versions of stories and things. And it didn't always fit within the paradigm of what it kind of meant to be a Black girl growing up in South Central Los Angeles in the 80s and 90s. And so while I was able to, what many people might refer to as kind of code switch and turn it on and off, depending on what environment I was in, at its core, I just loved being in the corner with my books, writing my stories, and embracing the nuance of language. I would sit and just read the dictionary. It was just, very bizarre behavior for many young kids at the time. And it was really my grandmother who first introduced me to the work of Audre Lorde. My mother's namesake is also Audre, my mother, that is. And so my grandmother said, let me introduce you to another Audre. And it's someone who's going to essentially remind you that even when you're most misunderstood, even when you're feeling bruised or hurt or bothered, you should never be silent. So at the time, I wasn't really old enough to fully appreciate or recognize the intersectionality of all of the amazing things that Audre Lorde would bring to me and to others. But the quote that my grandmother gave me to that kind of awkward, nerdy Black girl was, I have come to believe over and over again that what is most important to me must be spoken, made verbal and shared, even at the risk of having it bruised or misunderstood. So I felt kind of empowered at that point to speak up, to speak out, even in that kind of hyperverbal nature that I had even back then. So there's a kindred connection from the start, and I essentially was not reintroduced to her work until college, at which time I also didn't have a phone because that was the 90s. So this was BG before Google. We were not able to access the wealth of information that we now have about Audre Lorde.
Well, it's cool on the poll to see that so many of you feel like you have a touchstone for her in your lives. I'm just going to run through some really quick bio information of her, about her. She was born in 1934 in New York, grew up in Manhattan. She's a child of Indian parents from Grenada. And she, Rosa, you said the quote earlier, she sort of self-described herself as Black, lesbian, mother, warrior, poet. That is a description that you often see associated with her. She, in a lot of her writing, she talks, we're going to talk a little bit about motherhood, though we tangentially, I think, but she has written quite a bit about having a significant mother wound. The relationship with her biological mother was not the best. And in some ways kind of insinuates that led her to reading, and it led her to poetry. And so to express herself as a child, she used to recite poems that she had memorized. And it wasn't until she went to say something one day and couldn't grasp at a poem that she started writing her own as early as 12, 13 years old. She worked as a librarian throughout the 60s in New York. And then married, interestingly, a white gay man, had 2 children, and then spent the most of her adulthood in a lesbian partnership with Francis Clayton. Audre Lorde we'll talk about some of this, has made significant contributions to feminist theory, second wave feminism, critical race theory, queer theory. And it's really all of these intersections and the interplay of these intersections in this conversation about identity and how we define identity and talk about identity, and how the many identities that we carry truly should impact us, our work, and therefore impact our activism. And there are a host of books. We'll talk, if we get a chance, we can mention some of the most important books, but that idea of intersectionality is sort of at the core of everything that she wrote and everything that she did. She kind of comes on the scene, and the political scene, during the late 60s and the 70s, as second wave feminism is taking off, but mostly because she was critical of it. So you're talking about the height of the 60s, the civil rights movement. Second wave feminism, first wave feminism is primarily about white women and the right to vote. Second wave feminism is dealing a little bit more with women's right to education, reproductive rights, what's happening in the workplace, sort of breaking down gender roles. And Audre Lorde was all for that. She was in support of that, but ultimately said that the movement was extremely flawed and would not lead to real change because it was too monolithic, because the conversations about women were too monolithic and they were exclusive to women of color, women of different socioeconomic backgrounds, as well as women who identified as LGBTQ. And so she talks a lot about second wave feminism sort of being reductive and harmful, right? And there's this whole thing about like that white women were the face of second wave feminism, while the women who were raising their children and cleaning their homes were Black. And so how could you be out in the world advocating for systemic change for women and then ignoring a whole subset of women that was supporting your work and your advocacy? And in this idea of just this free labor was allowing you to have this voice and this opportunity, but your messaging was completely forgetting about them. So she believed in this idea of theory of difference. There are a couple really powerful quotes. As women, we have been taught either to ignore our differences or to view them as causes for separation and suspicion rather than as forces of change. Without community, there is no liberation. Community must not mean a shedding of our differences, nor the pathetic pretense that these differences do not exist. This is from the same document and same speech that a lot of people know this quote: for the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us temporarily to beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change. And this fact is only threatening to those women who still define the master's house as their only source of support. And I think, and this is where Ryane and I were going to try to focus on the political, and we'll stay there. But when I read that, I can't help but think about other conversations, Ryane, that we've had, both about recognizing the power and partnership and the relationships that our mothers had with other women and how defining those were for us. And then sort of full circle now ourselves as women and mothers and educators and all these, you know what I mean? Like how much life we get from our relationships with other women and women across who have multiple identities under that umbrella. But anyway, it hit me because I was thinking about you and how important our relationship is and sort of like our survival. So we're gonna try to stay on the politics though, but that's I think a intro into a lot of what we learn and a lot of what we hear about Audre is this idea of like, you don't have to check any parts of yourself in any movements that require that you do, that don't have space for the multiple identities that you inhabit is not an inclusive movement. Is that a good transition for you, Ryan?
No, well, it's a perfect transition, but really with gratitude, I just wanted to chime in and point out something that I think goes kind of unsaid, but it's lived out in Audre Lorde's existence. She really embodied this notion of the chosen family, the chosen village, the chosen friendships. And in that, I believe it's what kind of brings LaCoya and I here to this juncture today. It's an extension of these relationships that feel very sacred and feel very chosen. When you are constantly a part of what is famously titled her essay collection, Sister Outsider, you start to create these chosen relationships that also embrace that notion of being marginalized or being on the outside. I'm confident that I wouldn't be the type of friend, the type of mother, the type of educator, the type of author if I wasn't constantly exposed and fortified by women relationships and in diverse relationships, surrounding myself with people who also sit on the margins and push against maybe some of those societal expectations or norms. Even the shaping of my family, which is one that is both blended, culturally diverse, involves, children I've birthed and children I've adopted and all sorts of different things. It feels like an extension of what I was able to witness Audre Lorde live out in her work. And I think as educators, as well as authors, we often find ourselves in communities that really do prescribe, even in the most creative spaces, prescribe how you should show up. The publisher might identify this is what a Black writer looks like. Academia might identify, well, you can be a tenured professor, but if you have a bunch of kids, we're not really sure how you can do all of those things. And writing circles might identify, well, this is what a writer should look like. And I'm most grateful for the places and spaces, Antioch included, that have really encouraged and allowed me to show up in these like self-defined multiple identities that really sit at the core of what Audre Lorde was challenging us all to do.
Mm-hmm.
So should we talk a little bit about her political work here and maybe abroad a little bit, right?
Sure, sure. I was walking across my campus today in the little bits of rain. I think I was sharing with Sarah about, from Seattle, that LA is not accustomed to rain. We don't know how to function. There's water coming from the sky. We're all bundled up as if we're in like a storm. And for those of you that are familiar with LMU, which is where I teach and work, we actually have a slab of the Berlin Wall and it sits right across from a Cadoba. So go figure. I mean, there's just a real big cognitive dissonance with all of that. But the reason I mention that is because Audre Lorde's work sits at this global intersectionality of academia. She embraced and was embraced both nationally and abroad. And I find, especially working in higher education right now, that we're all grappling with these challenges, these multifaceted challenges of higher education in America. There are various aspects of our educational access and diversity and inclusion that are under attack. And as I'm walking across campus, looking one way, seeing Cadoba, looking another way, seeing this slab of the Berlin Wall, I'm asking myself, well, what would Audre Lorde say about the times that we're living in? It's not really the Cadoba, of course, that's the constant reminder, but it's the charismatic writer and activist who was only teaching and working abroad in Germany in these short stints, starting around 1984, a little bit in 1985. She would go for months at a time. And I know that I often feel really constrained by kind of the traditional 16-week semester. How many things can I do? How many problems can I solve? How many students can I teach or touch? And seeing that in this short amount of time, she was able to address the political developments between white and Black women. She was able to look at the difficulties that people of color and immigrants were experiencing. She was able to embrace not only the physical, but the metaphorical manifestation of the divide, of the wall. I couldn't help but be mind blown that she was talking about this in 1985, and yet we're still dealing with those types of divisions in 2025. Some of those things are even coming back, as we know, full circle. So she was a visiting scholar at the Free University in Berlin. She was really instrumental in helping Black women in particular kind of identify themselves as Afro-German and again, embracing these kind of self identities. She found herself in a city and a country divided. And I think we're finding ourselves right now, right, in a city and a country divided. On any given moment, I'm receiving text messages as an administrator of our writing center about public safety alarms for ICE, about a possible active shooter encounters, students grappling with challenges ranging from loss of aid, loss of accommodations, food insecurities, and yet we're also supposed to just teach them how to write an essay or, some basic type things amidst these larger challenges. And when it comes to breaking down barriers to and binaries about women and marginalized groups with respect to race and class and gender and sexuality and ability and more, I'm inspired by the reality that with this one little slab of a Berlin Wall, I don't have to figure out how to do it all. I just have to build community with other like-minded people that want to do the same. It can feel very overwhelming at this time. And I'm imagining that, this Zoom is likely filled with other writers, other educators, students, and the like, people who are living at that intersection of overwhelm. And I'm standing in between a Cadoba and a broken slab of the Berlin Wall while imagining what would Audre Lorde say at this time. And I think what she would challenge us all to do with that same quote that LaCoya mentioned earlier is the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. So what tools do we need? We need community, right? We need each other. We need outspoken and unapologetic self-defined identities. It's why I don't care if I have to spend day one or day two or day three. I will make certain that I understand what my students' names are, what their pronouns are, how they want to be referred to. And if that changes, 5 years semester, then let me know, let's change again. We'll turn that silence into language. I go back to that little Black girl that, felt odd and nerdy and didn't really know how to fit in. And I'm reminded that I need to turn the volume up on those experiences and those languages. We'll write as an act of defiance, as an act of protest. We'll have difficult conversations. I think that's one of the challenges that we're struck with right now, especially during this current time period. We're actually being encouraged to be silent about injustice. We're being threatened at risk that things will happen to us, happen to our professions, our careers, our work, our writing. And yet Audre Lorde would tell us we have to fight against that. We have to do the exact opposite. We have to encourage healthy and safe and powerful learning communities that really invite us to be authentic and true. So I spend a lot of time kind of dismantling the difference between myself as professor or administrator or writing center director or academic resource director, and instead letting my students know I don't have all the answers all the time. I'm trying to figure it out too. Well, let's write about it. Let's talk about it. Let's cry about it. Let's, laugh hysterically about it because there's nothing else to do sometimes but laugh until you cry. So Lord really reminds us that true learning and teaching occurs when students and faculty and activists and artists recognize the humanity in each other. I think we've kind of lost that. The work of what many of us do was largely umbrellaed in buildings called the humanities building. But as we've been kind of pushed out and siloed out, we almost can fall prey to these hierarchical structures of, the professor, the student, the administrator, the dean, the whoever, the president. And it's why I elect to kind of go back to basics, to teach and to serve in the humanities. It's why I encourage my students to feel the full range of emotions during this time, to feel the anger, the sadness, the frustration, the hope, the activism. It's why if LaCoya texts me and was like, hey, in November, we're going to talk about Audre Lorde. And I'm like, okay, I mean, whatever, tell me when, because these are these life-giving conversations that are vital and necessary to surviving this time. So if this Black woman with all of these intersectional identities can go to Germany during a time when it was dealing with so much division and conflict and come back and make all of this change, both nationally and internationally, I think that I can stand in between that intersection of Cadoba and the Berlin Wall and just handle my small little corner of the world by building this community together.
Let me say something real quick,
Yeah,
Rob.
please.
I think it's really interesting too that I think there was a real general sense that with this second presidency, we were going to be able to ride this out, that if we just buckled down and stayed quiet, that we might be able to survive. Now, real folks were saying, absolutely not. Doomsday is coming, revenge. But I do think, as we start this year and we see some of these pillars and higher learning capitulate and play this game, right? It was very clear that, oh no, this is going to be different. And what's really interesting about Audra in this place to me is that instead of this kind of cowering, right, and thinking that you can ride it out, that a lot of her work is almost like this is when you should be the loudest. This is when you should be claiming everything. Not in any way saying that that is easy, because I think some of our groups are struggling to figure out how to be loud, right? But this idea that we can hunker down and just barricade ourselves for the wave and then we'll come out and things will be rosy. We've seen very clearly that that's not going to be the case, or it isn't. It isn't the case.
And loud comes in different ways, right? So there are times when we're gonna have to recognize that certain populations are tired, certain populations
Absolutely.
are looking for that release and that ease, but it doesn't mean that they aren't looking to be seen. There's systems that are currently endeavoring to erase, to overshadow, to make invisible the brilliance and beauty of our art and our identities. And so I think recognizing at times when to step forward, when to amplify, when to turn the volume up, looking at allyship as an additional example of, okay, now it's my time to step forward and to shine on behalf of others that might be a little more overwhelmed during this time period. I'm convinced that Lord would challenge us to be seen in multiple ways, as really kind of indicated in her quote. She has a particular quote during the transformation of silence. And this is as far back as 1978. So that's the year I was born. It feels so prophetic. In the cause of silence, each of us draws the face of her own fear, fear of contempt, of censure, of judgment, or recognition, or of challenge, of annihilation. But most of all, I think we all fear visibility without which we cannot truly live. And that visibility, which makes us most vulnerable, is that which also is the source of our greatest strength. We can sit in our safe corners, mute as bottles, and we will still be no less afraid. So while I oftentimes realize I don't have all the answers, and that is heartbreaking to me because I'm positioned in a time in my life where I think I'm supposed to have the answers, right? I'm supposed to have the answers as a mother. I'm supposed to have the answers as a college administrator. I'm supposed to have the answers as an educator or a mentor. And yet at times I don't. But I know that being quiet isn't going to alleviate my fears. I will be no less afraid if I'm in a safe corner mute as a bottle. And so that's really the only gift that I know that I can offer in, 46 years of life now. I will no longer be that quiet little 7-year-old girl who was first introduced to her work. I'm now going to encourage people to speak up and to be seen. And if necessary, lean into my community and my friendships when I recognize that I am, kind of at a space of overwhelm and I need somebody else to pick up the baton.
I know we're running out of time, Rose. I was just going to say one more thing to this idea of visibility, that the cancer journals, which are journals that she kept and wrote while fighting breast cancer. And then I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was she recovered from that. And then years later, cancer returned in her body. And that's what ultimately caused her death. But the cancer journals are highly regarded in the illness narrative genre. And so the reason I think that text resonates so widely is because of course, she's confronting mortality and what her life has been, which is hard, and only really skilled folks can write about that, right? But at the heart of that, it's about her fight to be seen as someone who was inflicted with cancer, someone who did not want to hide her mastectomy, someone who was looking for community with other women who were breast cancer fighters and survivors. And she has this thought about, like, if I am silent, right, then I can't turn language into action. I can't find, like, otherwise I just ride this out alone. And that was the other option. It's either I speak up, I be seen, I look for communities and others who know what this struggle is about. I join hands with them. We force ourselves to the front of the line to be seen. And if not, then I'm suffering all by myself in silence. And she ultimately lands, I think, in that text that the biggest regret of her life were the years that she remained silent about pain, about her journey, the years she did not know how to advocate and use her voice. And she ultimately says, I have a duty to speak the truth as I see it and to share not just my triumphs, not just the things that felt good, but the pain and the intense, often the unmitigating pain as well. And I think that's why that text and so much of her work, because she was willing to expose that and to say it out loud, right, is why so many people gravitate to her. Maybe I'm wrong in that, but I think there's something about this desire in all of us to be seen that constantly pulls us back to her.
Can I add one more thing to that? Because it's
Yeah.
to a quote that actually you and I referred to on a panel that we did
Oh,
years back at AWP. Quite humbly, LaCoya would probably not admit that we hosted a panel that very much so talked about kind of the intersection of race and writing and motherhood and academia. But she moderated this panel a mere months after having her first daughter and second child. And she stood up there, both breastfeeding, asking all these riveting questions, negotiating all of these things. And I was just in awe of my sister, in awe of my friend, because the quote that we were referring to at the time is a very popularized quote from Audre Lorde, and it talks about caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. But I always viewed that quote as, okay, I get to retreat. Self-care for me is like leaving, going to the spa. I'm not engaging anymore. I'm closing the door. I don't want to engage. And when I was able to dig a little deeper into her cancer diaries, it was actually her saying self-care was speaking up. Self-care was not being silenced. Self-care was writing her story. And so it was just a nuanced kind of addition to being seen and the power of the written word. And yes, self-care could indeed mean, a retreat for a
Right.
momentary time. But I think for many of us, especially those of us that are in communities, arts communities, and scholastic communities, looking at like the intersection of creative and scholarly practice, what she was really saying as a necessary political act and a core part of our work was to not be silent. Because how cancerous could it feel to not be able to speak your truth? And I
Right.
have a newfound appreciation for what that self-care she was referring to, while I got to see my friend cradle her baby and show that she could exist in these multiple identities that many people likely said, you can't do that. You can't both take a baby and go to AWP and present and do all of these things. And to LaCoya, she said, well, yes, I can. And she did it. So I'm now learning alongside all of you about some of these quotes that were these, kind of little tidbits. And now I'm gathering even more inspiration during a time when I think I need it the most.
I receive that, friend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are going to begin to transition into giving voice to audience and keep the conversation with you too, right? I now see how you're embodying in your lives and in your work these learnings that you're sharing with us, and then just your back screen is telling us how you embody that in such a powerful way. So we have in the chat we have one generous poem shared by Asa. Do you want to read it a little bit? Just that cool poem,
Oh,
piece of poem.
yeah, just it's the last line, I believe, of the
Yeah.
solstice.
Uh-huh.
What's resonating with, I think, what you're getting at the end there of bravery, just may I never lose that terror that keeps me brave. May I own nothing I cannot repay.
Mm.
Thank you.
And Holly, you brought up self-care. What something led you to think in those terms? Holly, do you want to share?
Oh, I was just saying, I really appreciated talking about how self-care is like that alignment piece of like what is it? Bringing your voice is bringing self-care. And I think in general, I just want to say like everything really resonated with me, but the piece that through her work and, through the conversation that really stuck out is like the intersection of motherhood. And we really don't talk about that very often. And yeah, it just really hit me and I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think we had to do a part 2 on that one, right? We were trying to figure out how to fit it in. I don't know that we can, but in thinking about sort of owning all of these identities, I had a dear friend who was at AWP with us many years ago, Ryan, who I remember when she was doing her dissertation, they had a class at this prestigious university that was specifically for the Black students, Black women students in this program, in this PhD program. And one of the advice that they were given was that they should delay motherhood, they should delay marriage, that they should focus on finishing their dissertation, getting tenure, blah, blah, blah. And at the time, I didn't think much about it, but my friend was very resistant to that and said, well, the white girls are having their babies and the white girls are having their celebrations. Like, why do we have to put that aside? And I think about that often now because we run into these places where I feel like, oh, this is not a space for me to mention that I'm a mom, right? Or this is not a space for me to say, I got to check my phone because somebody may be texting me or something. And I don't know, like, I'd like to think that we have moved past sort of the judgment of that. and whatever, whatever we attach to those things. But I appreciate reminders from Lord that I don't have to check that. You may not be the audience to hear whatever I have going on related to that, but I don't necessarily have to check that at the door. I start all of my classes as I allow students to introduce themselves, and I introduce myself last. I say, my name is LaCoya, live in LA, married, 3 children, 10, 7, 5. You will probably meet someone over the course of these 10 weeks, okay? I do the best that I can. I want to give you grace. I ask for some grace occasionally, but I want you to bring your whole self to this class, to your writing, and therefore I bring my whole self as well. And they are a part of me. It is what it is. But I appreciate that you had, because there is a sect of even Black women's work. There's another sect of Black women writers who were saying, this is not, we putting that to the side. We don't want to deal with that. And I think we even see some of that conflict today, both around motherhood and ranking in society and how that constantly changes. But I think we also see it in this idea too currently about self-care and what is appropriate self-care. And we've had this broader conversation around Kamala's run and the elected person, and what Black women were going to do this time around versus what they were not going to do, and why some of them have chosen to back out to let some other people be at the front of the march this time. But there's some conflict even in that conversation, right? We can't let it fail. We can't let it fail. Versus, no, maybe it's your time to sacrifice your body and to sacrifice your lives in the fight. So I don't know. You got any thoughts about that? Because I think it's died down, but it was kind of hot there for a while.
It was a really big, I think, conflict, but I also would add to that point, Holly, we'd probably have to do an entire other conversation because um, it goes back to that discussion about the patriarchy. It goes back to that discussion
Right.
about the master's tools. The few times that I had been told throughout my career, both as a tenured professor and as an author, about my relationship to motherhood, it was always to reference, you know, Virginia Woolf or something like that. Well, you'll never be able to do this. You'll never have a room of your own.
Of
I
your
even
own.
kind of return back to Annie Dillard, who talks about, the significance of choice, the thing that kind of separates us and defines our humanity is our ability to choose. But sometimes that choice, it comes with a certain amount of privilege. And so what I am most inspired by is, while Audre Lorde may have not had this kind of distinctive quote around the notion of choice. I mean, she's had so many distinctive quotes, but maybe she didn't have a distinctive quote around the notion of choice. She lived out choice, right? She
Mm.
chose to live and mother and write and teach and be in her own self-defined way. And so during my second pregnancy, when I, just earned tenure at a prior campus that I taught, and a colleague looked at my very large pregnant belly and it with disgust said, "Oh my goodness, you're going to do this again." Because this idea that you were going to be both an English professor and a mother, and what was that going to be? I was really affirmed. It almost felt, dare I say, political, that
Mm.
yes, I am going to do this again. I'm going to do this again and maybe again. And then I might go adopt some. Then I might go grab a few more. I'm going to do this again because this is my life. And I'm not going to wait until maybe all the kids are out of the house, because if that's the case, I'll never write again. I'm not going to wait until certain things align or fit. I just have to live in the intersectionality of all of these identities. And while I may not have seen that exhibited in many of the authors that I kind of grew up having to see and read that didn't exactly reflect me, I can say that I saw it lived out in the life of Audre Lorde.
Mm.
I have a few more, I think we have a few more questions.
Well, the chat is becoming a repository of amazing
Yes.
bibliographic recommendations. And there is a question very concrete by Sam. Sam, do you want to represent your question?
Yeah, I can read it out loud. Also Ryan is my boss at the Writing Center. But my question is, how do we ignite passion or conversation from institutions? I'm thinking more of like higher ed that value political apathy over connection? Like, how do we pull that out from the foremost voices at those institutions?
Should I take this one? I only say so because Sam is a shining example of why I know I will eventually have ease and I will have rest, because there is a new generation of dynamic scholars and activists that are coming behind me. We affectionately refer to her as Dr. Qualls, because although she's a senior undergrad, she's applying to PhD programs and working on dynamic material and women and gender studies and sociology and the like. So we're going to be okay, because the generation coming behind us has assured me of such. But when it comes to the apathy that is sometimes shrouded in diplomacy, right? It's not even loud apathy. It's more like, this is just and kind and right for you not to make such a loud noise. And it's kind of this, can we all get along mentality. I go back to the power of the written word, right? The Loyolan knows that they can quote me. They come to me often. My students know that if we can't say it out loud, we can put it in writing, and there is often a lot more longevity to the written word anyway. So I encourage students to journal their thoughts, be vocal, find places and spaces where they can write what it is that they want to say, and have the courage to build community and speak up and speak out, get involved, start clubs, start programs, live your life out loud the way that you want to, because oftentimes someone is just waiting for you to be the example. They're waiting for just one or two or three more people to finally say the very thing that they've been thinking about, and it will catch wave. It will become contagious. As contagious as silence is, so can noise be. And my children will remind me of this all the time. Noise is just as contagious. And so I know it is challenging in an environment that sometimes looks at diplomacy as the way to be. But I think we also want to use the mission of these colleges, use the strategic plans of these colleges, use the course outlines and the student learning outcomes and all of the things that have been said, whether it be through marketing and communications or whether it be through mission
Front page.
and delivery. This is what you said you were. This is what I came to school because of, and therefore this is what I have to say. And I'll be there on the front row clapping loud, so you'll at least have one person that's rooting you on, Sam.
I think too, just to add to that, Sam, that there is a really big history of colleges and universities being the center of activism. And I think we should talk about that more. And because there's a reason why who shall not be named went straight for them and went straight for those institutions, right? Because we don't want folks to have that knowledge. We don't want folks to know, we don't want folks to go to school so you can learn about intersectionality and you can learn about communities, cross-cultural communities and identities, because if the more that you build those sort of coalitions, the less they have power. And I think that's what we're bumping up against right now. I've been shocked, just shocked in 2025 by academia, both large places and small. But I think Ryan is right that the real energy in that remains with you young folks, as the old folks say. But I believe in you, Sam. And I think there are a lot of old folks necessarily who are trying to figure out how to get back into the activist game. So yeah, but that history of what was happening on college campuses in the 60s and 70s, and you will hear a lot of people talk about the civil rights movement. That was because of young folks. That was because of folks in colleges who were doing that work. So I hate that all these years and generations later that work still will rest on y'all. But your voice and your power, I don't think is diminished. And I think that's why they're trying to make it more difficult for y'all to go and have spaces like this.
speaking of which, Dolly, you made a comment. Do you want to represent your own comment, Dolly, about these conversations?
I would just say, well, first of all, I'm driving in the rain. So I'm you know, I'm going to get off, but I would just say that I mean, the fact that we're having this conversation right now and the beautiful things that have been said by both Ryan and LaCoya, I mean, I just feel like how do we make why aren't we having these conversations more? Where's the podcast? Where's the weekly check-in? I just feel like it's imperative that we continue to have these conversations. And this, in its most simplest form, is activism right now at a time when we're all being told to basically shut up. And I'm horrified at the reality of what's going on, history being erased, voices being silenced, not being able to talk about LGBTQ plus. I'm horrified. And so this has been really, for me, incredibly informative and so desperately needed. And I just hope that, this institution, along with others, including LMU, will hopefully continue to have these conversations, which is essentially education, because you're educating me right now. And you're also reminding me and others the importance of these connections and conversations. And without them, we're all just kind of, like the level of activism right now seems to be like liking something on a phone or scrolling through Instagram, which is the weakest form of activism, right? So I'm so grateful for this conversation, and I just hope that it continues. And absolutely, there needs to be a whole nother segment on motherhood, because that's an entirely different conversation. But I'm grateful to both of you for what you've shared this evening, and I really thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Dolly.
Thank you so much, Dolly. And be careful with that driving and rain, stuff like that, okay?
I did pull over, just so you know. I've pulled over. I'm not.
Okay.
I pulled over to talk.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
just so you know.
Yes. Stephanie, our dear Vice President of Culture, Belonging, and Equity, made a comment here. Stephanie, would you like to step in to bring it up yourself?
Thank you, Rosa. LaCoya and Ryan, thank you so much for this beautiful conversation tonight. And shout out to David for reminding that these conversations happen every Monday.
Love it.
So join on in. But I just resonated so deeply with you all talking about mothering. I literally had my daughter living in a residence hall during finals week. My RAs had bet in terms of what I was having, when I was going to have it, and all of the things. And I grew up taking her on campus and making space, and it was really hard. I could even remember one supervisor that just, went off on me completely about having my child with me when her school flooded and I didn't have anywhere to take her. And then later on, as she became a mother, she came back and apologized because she had a baby, came back for 6 weeks, and then left altogether to take care of her child at home, which was wonderful for her. But it made me just think about, how do we create space and extension for mothering, whatever that consideration falls within, and people taking care of themselves. So I appreciate you all lifting that up. And for me, my children are older, grown out the house, but I'm mothering my mom. So I think that those aspects of our identity never go away. And so being able to talk about how we can navigate the academy and not lose connection with these people and responsibilities that we care so very deeply about. I don't know how to pull them apart. I don't want to pull them apart, but I appreciate spaces where we're able to acknowledge it and hold it. And I think that is something that she did not want us to miss or lose.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, for sharing that. I was just reminded as you spoke, and I think LaCoya touched on this as well. I recently transitioned from being fully in the classroom to a more administrative role. And as colleagues all talked with me about what to say and not to say in the group interview, I was getting still some of that kind of familiar advice around my children. But I'm different now, right? I'm not the 20-something-year-old who's having her first child. I'm the 46-year-old with a bunch of children. And it sat at the forefront of my interview that actually, when I got out, I wondered, did I say anything else but about my children? But I think it was so imperative at that moment that I fought against that, and that they recognized, if you want to know me, if you want to get closer to me, if you want to actually understand what matters to me, you should be asking me about my students and asking me about my kids. We should be talking about this next generation that's coming up. And I will likewise do the same. To my those who've chosen, to parent or not parent or whatever their circumstance may be. In many ways, art, is their baby. And I talk to them about how they've labored over their work and how they're delivering that work to the world. And that matters and that has value. But it also has value that, I have two kids, at home sick, and, one, navigating through college applications and all of the things in between. So when we talk about how do we link those narrative threads, recognize again the humanity in each other. Kind of start to demystify this notion that certain things are indeed taboo, because in communities like this, communities built on intersectionality, none of these things should be taboo. I want to know that you're okay. I want to know that you're well. I want to know that your recovery is going great. I want to know that you met or missed your writing deadline. Sam, I did not make that writing deadline. My own students hold me accountable, and there's all sorts of feelings around that. But I want to know these types of things, and I want to know what's going on with your children, and likewise. So I think in the kind of spirit of messy conversations and the building of community, we can kind of break down these hierarchical rules around how we're supposed to exist in these systems, and really just start being the village that we were kind of meant to be for each other, and fighting against some of those expectations. So thank you, Stephanie. I know that that's self-care for me when people ask me about the things that matter most to me.
And then, too, when you think about how that plays out systematically, like I know two women that I won't call out who I told I couldn't take this job because I just had a baby. And they were like, oh, no, 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 no. The time is now and we will support you. And that has meant the world to me in terms of thinking that I could attempt to juggle it all, or that I belonged in this space and that I didn't have to view babies as a hindrance. And there are two women whose children were older and they knew all about it. And they were like, no, we can do this. We can do this. And even just thinking about that, like I would have talked myself out of it, but having people in the system in those places to say, no, you are welcome. All of that is welcomed here. Mm-hmm. Right. And it's made such a huge difference in my life. Right. For even thinking that I belonged in the academy or that I could do it. So.
We are approaching the hour. The moment before then, we can stay. We can stay for as long as you want to be. I just wanted to bring up for those that might leave at 5. Wanted to remind them that Messy Conversations in the winter we have a different schedule. We're gonna stay on Mondays, but now we're gonna be, I think, from 1. What is the schedule, guys? From 1 to 2.
As in you're changing the time, Rosa?
Instead of, yes, changing the time. Right now it's 4 to 5, and we want to be more friendly with East Coast people, right?
Okay.
And I believe we are moving it earlier, right? I don't have the note in front of me right now. I should have had it. I apologize. But it was between, I think it's from 1 to 2. Something
that's
like that.
nice. They can hit
We're
up
gonna
the
announce
lunchtime
it
crowd.
properly. Yeah, we're gonna announce it properly so that you guys. But I wanted to bring it up for people that are gonna leave very soon. But we can stay here because we have still some comments, and for as long as LaCoya and Ryan, you want to be here a few more minutes beyond the 5. That's okay for us. Brad, you made a comment about the numbers don't lie. Would you want to elaborate?
Just that, as was mentioned earlier, that attacking education, because as you learn more, especially as, a white guy, learning all the things that you've not been taught when you were younger, especially coming from where I come from, you realize that while the system may have been structured for you, that's not how it should be. So the more you learn about intersectionality and everything else, the less likely you are to want to continue to perpetrate those lies in that system of oppression. So just as that happens for everyone, you're less likely to buy into what he's selling.
Sarah Beth? Thank you, Brad.
Yeah, thank you. I was introduced to Lorde my freshman year of college. We read Sister Outsider, and I just, that text, among so many other pieces of her writing, just reminds me of the importance of holding hope, but also thinking about how does visioning look for us as we are more real and more honest about our life and what we're carrying and what we're trying to navigate and what we're recovering from, what we're doing with children, as you were talking about. So I'm curious what's happening in the world that looks like visioning to both of you, and what's inspiring you, and also what from Lorde is calling you to bring that to your students and to your classroom and into your practices, your professional practices.
I will say one thing artistically that has happened for me. My first book out is a fiction novella, but I say it's fiction-ish, right? It's set in the 1980s in South Central Los Angeles, a Black girl growing up during that time period in a neighborhood affectionately referred to as the Avs. Many can kind of draw the parallels, right? I'm a Black girl in the 1980s, growing up in South Central Los Angeles in an area at least adjacent to the avenues. So it felt very natural to want to tell that story, that kind of awkward Black girl story. But in my current writing, I'm feeling far more inspired to write from the perspective of the world that I want to see versus the world that I know. And so kind of talk a little bit about visioning. I wouldn't go as far as to refer to it as speculative per se. I mean, we'll see where it goes, but I will say that I am feeling the need, the physiological need, an emotional need, maybe even like a mental health or psychological need to lean into writing things from the place of what could be. And, the visioning and the imagining versus maybe what I know is. So I see that as maybe an example of how Lorde is kind of inspiring my own work. She, along with Zora Neale Hurston, really kind of resonate with me when it comes to that. And I do encourage my students to engage in what we refer to kind of at LMU, because it's a Jesuit college, the kind of Jesuit examen. It's an aspect of kind of reflection and how you lean into looking at the various ways that you orient yourself in space. But in addition to them talking about who they are, where they are, what's going on around them, I've added an additional kind of component to that examen, which focuses on where do they want to be. And so I'm kind of asking my students to also imagine a world that could be uniquely different or arguably better or greater or bigger or more expansive than the confines that they might feel they're experiencing right now. So that would be maybe an example of how it's playing out in my work, and then maybe how it's playing out in my teaching.
Oh, that's beautiful. Go off, Octavia Butler. I love it. I actually will admit to feeling pretty downtrodden in 2025. I think my response to a lot of what's going on has been to turn the news off, to focus on my family, both biological and chosen, to resist the temptation to be busy, and to make sure that as things are coming up for my littles, that I am there and active to speak truth as well as some hopefulness when I can reach for it. I am also particularly inspired right now by a few educators in our lives for the kids, because I see actively the ways that they are trying to combat the BS that is trickling down to them. And I feel so grateful, and maybe particularly for the 10-year-old in fifth grade who has some understanding. I feel so grateful right now for a teacher in his life who is like, they say we can't do this. Okay, then I'll go around this door and I'm going to do this. You know what I mean? Or I'm going to pretend that I didn't get that email. My students are going to read this. And it has been so cool to witness in my 10-year-old, right? To have that sort of mirrored in his classroom, what we're doing at home. And so I'm hearing that in different ways that, oh, this ruling has come down, right? This thing is impacting the district, but in this classroom, until I get in trouble or whatever it is, this is what we're doing. And I'm so proud of teachers in this environment who are doing that and able to just like hold their own, because they're getting it from all in, and for principals who still have DEI committees and months that they recognize and things that they read over the intercom, who are like, no, and you can tell even some of the things from the district creatively worded. This impacts our money, and yet you can still do blah, 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 blah. I am inspired by those people right now because they're doing better than some of us at our, you know what I mean? Like, I appreciate that. Because I did have a sense of either this was all going to fall on my husband and I, or we were going to have to pull them out. Right. And so I've been really happy to feel that we are in community and in spaces where they're still getting some of that in the face of all of this persecution, I guess.
Oh,
Thank you both. Wow.
I would like us to bring attention to Arian Stone. Arian, a very interesting question that it goes in the lines of this conversation, part of the conversation. Arian, would you please represent your comment question? Or should I read it for you? Or maybe I mispronouncing your name so that you cannot hear me. But I'm going to read it. Could you have an idea on how to maybe introduce ideas of intersectionality to people who weren't able to get a higher education and learn right-wing and lean right-wing because of that? It's hard to blame those people for their lack of knowledge when the system was purposely built to do that. But I feel like if I just jump headfirst into topics like this, it'll just cause them to shut down further.
Mm.
Thank you, Erin.
That's a challenging one. I mean, in the spirit of Thanksgiving, that we don't really refer to that holiday in that way, but in the spirit of, messy conversations around the table, I just think that many things can happen in dialogic exchanges. And it could start in, a difference, regional differences, how California people do things maybe versus, how someone from the Midwest does. My husband's from the Midwest. How we all have these, differences that seem to like matter most, but what can't really be underscored enough is that when we're talking about intersectionality, we're talking about someone's humanity, right? So this isn't, me growing up with the LA Lakers and my husband growing up with, the Chicago Bulls. This is somebody's necessity and human right to exist. And so when I talk to anybody about these things, no matter where they lean, I really do talk to them from the perspective of um, one's right to exist. And where do any of us fall in our ability to dictate or determine that for someone? So I'm probably not the right person to ask, only because I was raised again by a grandmother who was introducing 7-year-olds to Audre Lorde, and I was in preschool talking about Reaganomics and things like that. My grandmother was affectionately referred to in our family as the cursing Christian, just very politically, strong. And so I have really been expected to speak loud and proud about the issues that really matter most. My grandmother, again, the cursing Christian, often referred to what she called the red parts of the Bible. So she would call that, classic Jesus versus political Jesus. And so she lives in me, and therefore I am probably the person that is going to not always introduce the ideas so gingerly, but not necessarily aggressively either. I'm just going to be who I am. I'm going to show up, to the dinner, with my beliefs and my friends and my, multifaceted family, and we're just going to live. We're going to exist. And I hope we can live and be and exist by example. And I'm going to remind people whenever possible that they cannot sit in opposition to someone else's existence. And however we model that for them, if it starts regionally, if it starts with a sports team, if it starts with whatever, so be it, however little or how big. But at the end of the day, we cannot sit in opposition to someone else's existence. How dare us ever believe that we had the right to do such a thing? Is probably the best advice that I would give. But I also don't know that it's always our responsibility to educate as well. Because we're not BG, right? It's not the 90s. It's not before Google, right? So we do have this access to so much information that I do want to remind people that they can't always shoulder the responsibilities of educating those that might be engaging in willful ignorance versus just, I couldn't get a college degree, which, could be up for debate, I guess. That's my messy response.
Your message, because you're bringing up important topics that deserve a conversation on their own, and then we must pay attention and learn from you and keep that in mind. If we
Rosa,
yes,
I would just like to offer, first of all, thanks so much to LaCoya and Ryane for this. And I see a part 2 and a part 3 dealing with all of these identities of Audre Lorde. I am much younger than Ryane and also LaCoya, but in 1978, I had the pleasure of hearing Audre Lorde speak at a Black Arts Council meeting, or conference rather, in Washington, D.C. I did not know who she was. I'd never heard of her because I'd come out of a very white state university in North Carolina. I'd never heard her name, didn't know her literature, didn't know a thing about her, but this woman brought up subjects and subject matters and expressed herself in ways I'd never, ever, 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 ever heard before. Not coming from any Black leader I'd ever witnessed. I was in awe. I was paralyzed in my own willing ignorance of her majesty. And when she finished, the whole audience, they just swam upon her. And I stood along the sidelines looking. I'd never seen any Black woman who commanded that kind of attention. And I definitely had seen quite a few Black leaders, C. Dolores Tucker and, Dr. Dorothy Height, Coretta Scott King, but this woman, Audre Lorde, was like a super spirit from another planet.
thank you, Clarence. Clarence is one of our members of the committee.
Thank you so much for that.
If you look at some of the writing, read some of the writing that scholars and students have written about her and how they've incorporated, like really studied all of her work and incorporate, it's really powerful. Just even the impact of her words, all of them, really taking them in. Ryan and I were both admitting that we still have a lot to learn, right? But when people write about how her words have impacted her, they sound a lot like you, Clarence, like that they were never the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Follow up to that one question. Thank you so much. And it talks about how people who get a college education are more likely to lean left and understand humanity. And if there's a way to offer the beginnings of that to someone who didn't get an education, I would lean into all the early ways that, I as a child got, kind of a formative education. And it's just through the writings that one admires, chunking them out, maybe not giving them the entire book that has this, extremely intersectional bio in the back that could feel intimidating and start talking about all of these things, but a list of her quotes that I will essentially be kind of curating with LaCoya after this and uploading. I can't imagine someone reading some of these quotes and not recognizing the humanity in this. And sometimes people need to get things in these bite-sized doses. They aren't ready or again aren't willing to digest the larger material. But I've done just lesson plans in the past, not exactly for this reason, more around the idea of like authorial voice, but I've taken certain sections of things and I've stripped away who said it. And students were so struck by why that particular quote resonated with them. When I think if I had had the person's name attached to it, they would have immediately thought, well, this doesn't resonate with me because I'm not this person or I don't exhibit this identity. So if there's writings that matter to you that have spoken to you, I would just talk about the things that matter to me. I mean, the Chicago Bears matter to my husband, and Audre Lorde matters to me. So I'm going to talk about the things that matter to me. But maybe you introduce some of this intersectional stuff in these bite-sized doses without necessarily um, letting them know that it's part of a larger scholastic discussion. I just don't know anyone who could read some of her quotes and not feel moved.
Well, I appreciate you, friend, because I acknowledge that I don't necessarily have the temperament of the patient right now to be at the center of that for a lot of. I don't. I'm just trying to protect, those closest to me and make sure they know that they can go wherever they want to go. And if they're ever in a space where they don't feel welcome, they ain't got to stay. But I do think that in terms of tools, that there are a lot of ways to talk about intersectionality, like intersectionality for beginners, maybe, that don't include the big ticket items, the isms, right? Like you can work your way there with some basic stuff, I think, before you have to talk 100% about systemic issues or whatever. So yeah, there are some things. If you Google for beginner, intersectionality for beginners, they got cute videos. They talk about everything other than race, class, gender, sex. You know what I mean? Like all these things, but it's true, like just all the multiple spaces that you inhabit, right? And then asking someone, now, would you like to chip away at any of these? No, because they make up who you are, and whatever degree of importance, that may change in the eyes of certain people. But I do think that, who was that? Mr. Stone, Aaron Stone, if I'm saying that properly, I'm sorry, or incorrectly, I'm sorry. I do think that there are some tools out there to have real basic conversations around it. Reading a comment. Rosa, we can't hear you.
Sorry, David, I apologize. David, you made a comment. Will you represent your comment yourself?
David, we can't hear you either.
About
Your
now.
mic. Yeah,
There you go.
now we do.
No, mostly just thanks to Ryan, who I'm meeting for the first time today. Genuine pleasure, and to my beloved colleague LaCoya. What a great conversation, and all the different things you touched on. And I just added to that one of the things that I value most in Audre's work is her views on difference. And are just championing the importance of difference. And I just included a couple of partial quotations, that she sees difference as raw and powerful connection, a fund of necessary polarities between which our creativity can spark. And is that connection between difference and creativity, instead of difference in fear or difference in ignorance and difference in all of the other things that we usually attach to difference. But it's actually a place for our creativity to spark. And that's something we're in desperate need of these days. So thank you so much for the conversation.
Thank you. Yes, that is an entire discussion as well. I think that her celebration of difference is kind of the narrative thread that connects it all, and takes us back to that need to be seen, and how that defines our humanity. So thank you. And it's an honor to be here, David.
When she says it's a waste of time, we spend so much time trying to ignore it, trying not to acknowledge it, but it's really where our power lies. If we can figure out how to acknowledge it and celebrate it.
I would like to add thank you guys for this very last portion, including David, of the notion of difference, because I want to just bring up another very, very messy element for future exploration, which is, is there any demographic that epitomizes literally the embodiment of difference? Are immigrants, by definition. Is immigrants looking for that, or finding themselves in the middle of difference because of their relocation? Just is literal. And those are the ones that are under attack right now. So it's just an interesting point to leave there on top of the table, which is it's some sort of idea that difference needs to be erased by any means necessary.
Thank you for that, Rosa.
I hope I didn't change the mood.
No, I'm
But,
just looking through the chat too. Thank you for all of the links. I mean, her
Sure.
work in Berlin talks a lot about immigration as well. So it just feels, really visionary and prophetic, and it feels like a salve for our current times. Having to kind of go back and prepare for today's conversation, I was really felt like I was almost reading an instruction manual or a roadmap for how to survive and address these uniquely challenging times. And immigration came up a lot. So thank you for that.
Mhm.
And shout out to Kirsten. I was hoping she'd be able to make it, because I've been in classes where she's spoken about this work and different figures in the movement that she's met. I've not heard her talk about Audre, but I would have loved to have heard a story or two from her. Maybe I'll email her. Who mentioned that? Was that you, Asa?
Yeah, and I was actually just talking to her last week when she was on campus, and she mentioned, she's been working on this People's History of Berlin app, and a big part of it is tracing Audre Lorde's Hangouts legacy impact there, and part of her work, bringing Lorde's influence into more of the popular knowledge in Berlin. There's actually a street renaming where they renamed a street after Audre Lorde, and Kirsten was a part of that, like making that happen. So she was just telling me about that the other day. Cool connection. You're part of that legacy.
Oh.
Our chat is like a repository, so we got to get all of this stuff together.
We are going to keep track of all those things for sure, and reshare them in the website of the conversation. I'm gonna want to miss. So just out of curiosity, who are students in the room? Could you raise your hand or put like some sign of students here? Students, and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. 6, not 5, 6. Okay. Thank you so much for caring about this space that is created for you.
I'm so excited about the time change. I hope that can maintain the crowd a little bit.
Sure.
And I could be wrong, but I think it's 12 to 1, Rosa. Does that sound right?
12 to 1. I don't know why I blank out. So I need to go to the notes, and I was trying to focus here and don't go away. So
and the idea would be 3 o'clock Eastern time and 12 o'clock Pacific.
Yeah, then that was it. Yes, launch, invade launch here, but yeah, something like that. Yeah, we want to inclusive to try that option. Yeah, thank you, Holly. Yeah, from noon to 1. Okay, so if you feel, I know that is terrible feeling, letting go this moment, because we were able to share such a journey today. Thank you to Ryan and LaCoya. And now, and thank you also for the comments and engagement that everybody brought with them. So this is just a very unique moment. I wonder if we should start closing and enjoy the aftertaste of being together and keep going on with your afternoon.
Thank you all. Appreciate you showing up.
I'm really grateful. This is a really kind of fortifying and inspiring experience. Like if I could start all of my Mondays having conversations like these, and I realize that this is something that's been going on for a while. I'm just honored to now be a part of this tradition. So thank you for having me, and thank you, as Rosa said, to all of the students who are engaging in this level of activism amidst what's, thesis time and finals and application time and all of those things. So I know what time it is, and yet you're here, and that matters, and that's
yes.
of your scholarship too. So thank you so much.
And thank you for saying yes, sweet friend, even though I didn't really give you a choice. I love you.
Of course, I wouldn't say no. Thank you so much.
Oh God, you're very loved here. Both of you.
Thank you very much. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
Until next time.
Until next time, my crew is showing up.
Yeah. This was the last of the season, but you will know winter is going to start, and you will know, everybody who is here will know. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. I see my niece's face popping up.
Yeah, they're like, okay, lady, we gave you your hour and a half. Good night. Good night, everybody. Thank you.